V10s are so rare for production cars. There's only really a handful of cars that have ever been made in a V10, but actually cars that were sold in the UK that were V10s, there's only really a few. And one of them is this. We're out in a beautiful Audi R8 V10 gated manual. Let's see what it's all about. I think the R8 is probably the most recognised supersports / supercar that's ever been made. And I think it's quite firmly a modern classic that is just undeniably going to go up and up in value and desirability. The R8's journey really is just so special. You know, it's one of those cars where they're just completely and utterly timeless. It doesn't matter where you see them and what guys they are, they just look amazing. And the V10 ones are just so special. The R8 itself was revealed at the Paris Motor Show in 2006, and as a model it was like nothing else anyone had ever seen. It was a daily usable high-end sports / supercar, all the looks and some practicality. You had a good boot, you had lots of easy access and lots of space within inside the cabin, which a lot of other rivals didn't have. So the R8 finally hit the road in late 2007, and they were a pretty rare sight at that point. Lots of them were sold, all of the allocation and all of the dealers across Europe were absolutely sold out, and there was a big backlog of people wanting to buy these cars. Lots were sold in manual, lots were sold in the early R-tronic, but in 2008 the V10 was unveiled, and that was where the car really started to take off. It was essentially the running gear, or it was marketed as the running gear out of a Lamborghini Gallardo, for a fraction of the price, more practicality and cheaper costs to keep them on the road. Two really important things within the life cycle and the early design of the R8. One, in 2004, Will Smith in iRobot drove what was essentially the concept to an Audi R8, the shape, the design, albeit futuristic and not practical, but it was called the Audi RSQ concept, and that was what led to the R8. Now, only 3 short years later, that car actually came into production, and I really do remember seeing that car in that film and thinking, if that came to be a car, my goodness me, I would absolutely love one. In May 2008, Tony Stark came to our screens in Iron Man. And what did Iron Man drive? Well, he drove an R8. And because the cars really were out there, but they weren't really seen that much, when that was on there, it just solidified the car's iconic and cool status. So the V10 engine that's in the Audi R8 ultimately started its life cycle in the Lamborghini Gallardo in a 5 litre, and then later went on to a 5.2. Now, Audi didn't use the exact same engine, they didn't use the exact setup, but what they basically used was the skeleton of that engine, worked on it, used some of the dry sump technology that was in there, used slightly different heads and things like that, and whilst there were slightly different power outputs, ultimately came with this 5.2 TFSI engine that produced nearly 520 horsepower. 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, and that's with a manual box as well. And these cars just get down the road so easily because they're 4-wheel drive, so they actually grip and go, but they're so easy to drive as well. They're very, very forgiving, nice easy clutch, very, very easy switch gear, things like that. The V10 manual really is such a rare car, and I don't think a lot of people realise quite how rare they actually are. There's 231 UK cars sold in a coupe and 181 in Spider form. So that's 412 cars as a V10 manual across all the years that they were available. That's crazy. And when you compare that to 873 autos across the coupe and the Spiders, not including the later Plus models, the special editions, the GT, etc., they were all auto. So essentially there's 3 generations of the R8 throughout its whole life cycle. This particular one is a Gen 1, and the best way of telling that a car is a Gen 1 is the fact that it has oval tailpipes on a V10 and twin tailpipes on a V8. It went to a facelift car, which was classed as a Gen 1.5. You got a slightly revised engine, slightly revised switchgear, infotainment, and the styling at the back with tail lights, and the exhaust went to round. Later on in its life cycle, it went to a Gen 2. The Gen 2 is what we've seen right up until the end of the life cycle of the R8, where it's gone to a slightly different shape, slightly less curvy, and slightly more bulky and chiselled, I would say. Very, very different cars for very, very different reasons, but that Gen 2 didn't come with a manual. So as good as it wasn't quite as analogue and engaging as how I believe these Gen 1s were. You know, whilst I was out driving this, it really did dawn on me just for a split second how rare these V10s are. And, you know, you just think, hey, okay, yeah, I know a V10 is not a very common sight on the road, but actually, when you drill into it, how many cars were actually made with a V10? And then how many of those were made with a manual option? And how many of them actually ever came to the UK? We had a BMW E60 and E61 variant M5 and the M6 that went with it. Now here in the UK we only had the SMG version, which, hey, it was very theatrical, it was very fun at full chat, but it wasn't a car to be going around town and be enjoying to drive every day. And then from there we had the R8, we had the Lamborghini Gallardo, which shared very similar roots. And then the only other things that I can think of, and I'm sure if I'm wrong, please do comment down below, we had the Dodge Viper, which never came to the UK as a new car, and of course the Porsche Carrera GT. Both of those cars are extremely rare, modern classics. The Carrera GT worth an absolute small fortune, and the Dodge Viper just becoming even rarer across the world. This is something to just absolutely be cherished, because it's part of history, but it's never ever going to be part of our future. So for me, the R8 is a sure bet to have as a supercar, to own with very little drawbacks, and just to be enjoyed, and even daily driven if you wanted. They are absolutely fantastic.